I still remember the way he used to look at me, like I was the calm in his chaos, like I was the one person who made his world stop spinning. His eyes had that softness, that rare kind of warmth that makes you forget the noise around you. When he smiled, it felt like the world paused for a second just to let me breathe. That's how it was in the beginning. Simple, quiet, beautiful. We met in college. I was the girl who loved the library more than parties, and he was the boy who could light up an entire room with one joke. We shouldn't have made sense, but somehow we did. He noticed me when no one else did. He remembered things I didn't even think I'd told him. My favorite song, how I hated cold coffee, how I always looked at the sky before answering hard questions. And in those small details, I thought I found forever. He'd wait outside my class every evening, leaning against that old bike that broke down every other week. He'd smile when he saw me, that same half smile that made every bad day melt away. Sometimes he brought me flowers, sometimes just silence, but both felt like love. We'd ride around the city aimlessly, no destination, just laughter and stories. I didn't need fancy dates or grand gestures. All I ever wanted was that peace I felt when he held my hand. I remember thinking, if this isn't love, then nothing else ever will be. Because love to me wasn't dramatic. It was in the small things, in the way he remembered my exams, in how he waited even when I was late, in how he'd call just to say goodnight because he couldn't sleep otherwise. It was that kind of love that makes you believe you're safe. And for a while, I was. Until I wasn't. It didn't happen all at once. Heartbreak never does. It starts slowly, quietly, like a candle flickering before it burns out. The first time I felt it, it was so subtle I almost ignored it. He texted a little less, stopped calling at night. His messages turned shorter, his voice softer, not in tenderness, but in absence. He'd still say I love you, but it started sounding more like a routine than a feeling. And I, foolishly, kept pretending nothing had changed. Because sometimes love makes you blind. Not because you can't see the truth, but because you don't want to. There were days when he'd go missing for hours. No calls, no replies. And when I'd ask, he'd smile and say, "Just got busy, babe. Don't overthink." And I'd believe him. Because that's what love does. It teaches you to doubt your instincts before you ever doubt the person. But the silence grew. The laughter faded. And every time I looked into his eyes, I started seeing something new. Distance. Like I was no longer standing in the same place in his heart. I remember one evening we met at our usual cafe. The same corner table, the same music, the same coffee. But everything felt different. He kept glancing at his phone, his smile strained, his hands restless. I tried to ask what was wrong, but he brushed it off as, "It's nothing, I'm just tired." But it wasn't nothing. I could feel it. That invisible wall, that quiet space between two people who used to be inseparable. And that night when he dropped me home, he didn't kiss my forehead like he used to. He just said, "Take care," and drove off. It was such a small thing, but it broke something inside me. Because love doesn't die in a fight or a goodbye. It dies in silence, in the small moments when someone stops trying. That night I sat by my window, staring at my phone, waiting for a message that never came. I played our song over and over, like maybe the music could fix what words couldn't. But deep down, I knew the boy who once made me feel safe was slowly becoming a stranger I still loved.
Love doesn't end loudly. It doesn't crash or scream or shatter. It fades, quietly, almost kindly, until one day you realize the person standing in front of you feels like a stranger who remembers your favorite color. That's how it began to fall apart between us, not with a fight, but with silence. The first few weeks after things began to change felt like a blur. We still saw each other, still talked, still did all the things couples do. But something about it felt forced, like we were both reading from a script that no longer made sense. The hugs felt shorter, the laughter came slower, and every "I love you" started sounding like a habit neither of us wanted to break. He began canceling plans, at first with reasons that made sense. Work meetings, deadlines, family calls. I nodded, smiled, and told him it was fine. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You believe their excuses, even when your heart starts whispering they're not true. Then it became frequent. The busy texts, the "sorry, can't make it" calls, the unanswered messages that stretched into days. I'd wait by my phone, scrolling through our old conversations, rereading the way he used to talk to me. Those long, messy paragraphs filled with warmth, jokes, and affection. Now it was just, yeah, maybe. 3 letters where once there were feelings. I asked him once softly, "Are we okay?" He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "Of course, you overthink too much." I laughed it off, pretending he was right. But something inside me knew better. Because love doesn't feel heavy when it's safe. It only feels that way when it's slipping away. He started spending more time with friends. I didn't ask who. I didn't want to sound jealous or needy. But each time, a small part of me broke a little more. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes when the person you love is still around, but no longer present. When they're sitting beside you, but their mind, their heart is somewhere else. The first real crack appeared on a Friday evening. He told me he couldn't meet, said he was working late on a project. I didn't argue. I trusted him. But that night, when I couldn't sleep, I opened social media, and there it was. A photo. Him sitting at a cafe I knew too well. That same blue shirt I'd given him for his birthday. And across from him, a girl, smiling softly, her face half hidden behind her hair, and her hand almost touching his across the table. It felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. My heart didn't break dramatically. It just stopped. I stared at the photo for a long time, waiting for my brain to come up with excuses. Maybe it's old. Maybe she's a friend. Maybe I'm overreacting. But every lie I told myself hurt worse than the truth I already knew.
I didn't call him that night. Didn't text. Didn't even cry. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the faint glow of my phone, realizing how fragile love truly is. How one picture, one moment, can undo years of trust. The next morning, he called. His voice was cheerful, pretending nothing had changed. "Hey babe, how's your morning?" I wanted to ask, "Who is she?" I wanted to scream, "Why are you lying to me?" But all I said was, "Fine." Because sometimes silence feels safer than hearing another lie. He talked about random things, work, weather, weekend plans, as if that photo didn't exist, as if I hadn't seen the proof that love can cheat with a smile. When he said, "I miss you," I almost laughed. How can someone miss you while replacing you? After that day, everything between us became mechanical. We still met occasionally, still spoke, still pretended to care. But I could feel the distance growing. He'd check his phone constantly, smile at texts that weren't mine, and every time he looked away from me, I could feel my worth slipping through his fingers like sand. One evening, he finally said it, those 4 words that sounded like a verdict. I need some space. Space, that cruel little word people use when they don't have the courage to say, "I'm done." I remember nodding, numb. I didn't argue or cry. I just watched him walk away, every step he took feeling like the echo of something ending. That night, I sat by my window watching rain trace lines down the glass and whispered to myself, maybe love was never supposed to hurt like this. But the truth is, it does, especially when it ends quietly. Because heartbreak isn't always about losing someone. Sometimes it's about realizing they were already gone long before they said goodbye.
Days passed like unfinished sentences. Every morning I woke up hoping he'd text first, hoping he'd sound like the boy I once knew. But each day began with silence, and silence, I've learned, speaks louder than anything. I told myself I'd stop caring, that I'd let him go. But love doesn't listen to logic. It clings, even when it's being torn apart, even when the pieces cut you. So one evening, I decided I couldn't keep pretending. I needed to see him, to ask him what we had become. I texted him, "Can we meet?" He replied after an hour, "Sure, same place." The same cafe where we used to sit for hours, laughing over coffee we never finished. Now I was going there to understand how something so beautiful had become so cold. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting in our usual corner, phone in hand, eyes elsewhere. He didn't look up immediately. When he finally did, it was a half smile, polite, distant, and painfully unfamiliar. For a moment, I just looked at him. The boy I once couldn't imagine my life without. And yet, sitting across from him, I realized how much of him I no longer recognized. "Have you been?" he asked casually, as if we were old friends catching up, not lovers falling apart. "I've been okay," I lied, forcing a small smile. There was an awkward silence, the kind that used to be comfortable between us. I took a deep breath. "I saw the picture," I said softly. He froze, eyes narrowing slightly, the kind of look people give when they're caught, but too tired to deny it. "What picture?" he asked, pretending not to know. I almost laughed. Not out of amusement, but disbelief. "Don't do that," I whispered. "Please, not with me." He looked down, exhaled, and said, "It's not what you think." The classic line, the oldest lie. I'd read it in books, seen it in movies, and now it was being used against me by the person I trusted most. I told him with my voice, "Then tell me what it is." He didn't. He just stared at his coffee, swirling it like the answer might appear in the foam. Finally, he said quietly, "I didn't mean to hurt you." That's what people say when they've already hurt you, as if saying it makes the wound smaller. I wanted to scream, to ask him why, to ask if she was worth the promises he broke. But my voice betrayed me. It cracked, and all that came out was a whisper. "Did you ever love me?" He looked up then, and for a second I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe even regret. But it wasn't love. Love fights. Love explains. Love stays. And he was already halfway gone. He reached across the table, tried to take my hand, but I pulled it back. Because when someone breaks your heart, their touch feels like salt on an open wound. He said, "I'm sorry," again. Those two words. Meaningless, overused, too small to hold the weight of what he'd done. I stood up slowly. My hands were shaking, but my heart was calm, like it had finally accepted what my mind had known for weeks. "You know what hurts the most?" I said softly. He looked at me, waiting. "It's not that you fell for someone else. It's that you let me believe you still loved me while you did." He didn't say anything. And in that silence, I found my answer. I turned to leave. The air outside felt colder, but lighter. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry, because sometimes strength isn't in holding on. It's in finally walking away. That night when I got home, I opened my phone and looked at our old messages one last time. Every word, every emoji, every promise. And then I deleted them all. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it also felt like closing a chapter that was never going to be rewritten. People think heartbreak ends when you walk away, that once you say goodbye, the pain stays behind. But the truth is, it follows you. It sits beside you on the bus. It hides in your favorite songs. It echoes in the spaces where someone's laughter used to live. After that night at the cafe, I told myself I was done. I deleted the photos, muted his number, unfollowed him on every app. But you can't delete memories. You can't block the way your heart skips when you hear a voice that sounds like his. Every morning, I'd wake up and reach for my phone, half expecting his good morning text. And every time I didn't see it, the silence cut a little deeper. It's funny how something that used to make you smile becomes the same thing that breaks you. I tried keeping busy, classes, work, friends, but grief has a way of finding you even in crowded rooms. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling at a joke someone had made, and then suddenly a memory of him would hit me so hard I'd forget how to breathe. Love doesn't leave quietly. It leaves reminders, small, cruel reminders everywhere you go. I stopped visiting the cafe. I couldn't walk past the park where we used to sit. Even the sound of rain felt heavier now, because he once said rain made him think of us. I hated that everything beautiful had his name attached to it. One night, my best friend came over. She looked at me and said, "You can't keep doing this to yourself." I smiled weakly. "I'm fine." But my eyes gave me away. She hugged me and whispered, "You loved him too much." Too much. That's what everyone said. But how do you love someone less when every piece of your heart was built around them? Weeks passed. Life went on, cruelly, indifferently. People laughed, classes resumed, time kept moving. But for me, it felt like the world had paused somewhere between holding on and letting go. Then one afternoon, I saw him again. It wasn't planned. He was across the street, laughing with a group of friends, and she was there, the girl from the picture. Her hand was in his, and he looked happy. Happier than I'd seen him in months. For a moment, the world blurred. I couldn't hear the traffic, couldn't feel the air. It was like every memory I'd buried came crashing back all at once. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear. But instead, I just stood there, frozen, watching the man I once called mine belong to someone else. He didn't see me, or maybe he did and just pretended not to. I'll never know. All I know is that for the first time, I didn't cry. I just felt empty. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. Our first meeting, our laughter, the promises, the lies. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized something. Heartbreak isn't about losing someone you love. It's about losing the version of yourself that existed when they loved you back. The next morning, I got up, looked in the mirror, and barely recognized the girl staring back. Her eyes looked tired, but stronger. There was sadness, yes, but beneath it, something new: acceptance. Love had broken me, but it also taught me who I was without it.
Healing isn't beautiful. It's not candles and soft music and peaceful sunsets. It's waking up every morning with a heavy chest, forcing yourself to smile, and pretending you've moved on when every song still feels like a reminder. It's messy, it's slow, but it's the only way forward. After seeing him that day on the street, I decided I couldn't keep living like a ghost in my own life. I started doing small things, reading again, going out with friends, saying yes to plans I used to avoid. At first, it felt forced. Every laugh felt borrowed, every smile rehearsed. But slowly, little by little, it started to feel real again. I'd walk to college alone now, the same route we used to take together. At first, it hurt. Every corner, every wall, every cafe whispered memories. But with time, the memories began to fade. Not because I forgot them, but because I stopped feeding them. That's the thing about pain. When you stop replaying it, it loses its power. There were still nights when it all came back. The scent of his jacket, the sound of his voice, the way he said my name. But those nights became fewer, and the tears didn't last as long.
I wasn't healed yet, but I was healing. One day, while helping my friend with the project, she asked, "Do you ever think you'll fall in love again?" I paused. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm not even sure I still believe in it." She smiled softly. "You will. Not everyone leaves." I wanted to believe her, but belief is fragile when you've been broken by the person you trusted most. Weeks turned into months. Life slowly began to fill up again. New routines, new faces, small moments of peace. Sometimes I'd catch myself laughing and realize that for those few seconds, I hadn't thought about him. And that was progress. But life has a strange sense of timing. It loves testing you just when you think you're finally fine. It was a normal afternoon when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. For a second, I thought it was spam, but something, instinct, fate, or maybe cruel curiosity, made me open it. "Hey, it's me." Just 2 words, but they hit like thunder. I stared at the screen, my hands suddenly cold, my heart racing in a way it hadn't in months. Him. After all this time. After all that silence. I didn't reply immediately. I just sat there, staring at his name, wondering what could possibly be left to say between 2 people who'd already said goodbye without saying it. Hours later, I finally typed, "What do you want?" He replied almost instantly, "To talk." Talk. Such a simple word, but it felt dangerous, like stepping barefoot on broken glass. I wanted to ignore him, to stay strong, to protect the little piece I'd managed to build. But closure is a tricky thing. Even when you know better, part of you still craves the ending you never got. That night, as I lay in bed, his message kept echoing in my mind. The same man who once shattered me wanted to talk, and I didn't know if my heart was ready to listen. For 2 days, I didn't reply. I read his message over and over, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, my heart waging a war my mind didn't want to fight. Every word I wanted to send felt like reopening a wound I'd worked so hard to close. But closure is cruel. It whispers that you're over it, until the moment you're not. On the 3rd day, I typed just 1 line. "Where?" He replied instantly, like he'd been waiting. "The cafe. Our place?" Our place? Those 2 words hit me harder than I expected. For a second, I could almost see us there again, laughing over half-drunk coffees, sharing secrets between bites of dessert. But that cafe wasn't ours anymore. It was just a memory wearing a familiar face. Still, that evening, I found myself standing in front of it. My heart thumped in my chest like it remembered the rhythm of his presence. I told myself I just wanted closure, but deep down, I knew I was lying. Part of me wanted to see him again. Part of me wanted to know if he ever regretted leaving. He was already there, sitting at the same corner table, phone in hand, his hair slightly longer, his face more mature, but the same eyes. Those same eyes that once made me feel safe and later made me feel invisible. When he looked up and saw me, his smile was small, nervous, unsure. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was strange. 2 people who once knew everything about each other, now struggling to find a single word that made sense. "You look different," he said finally. "So do you," I answered. And it was true. We were both different, shaped by choices and consequences that love couldn't protect us from. He looked down, fidgeting with his cup. "I know you didn't expect to hear from me, but I couldn't stop thinking about you lately." I wanted to ask, why now? Why not when I was crying myself to sleep? Why not when I begged for the truth and you chose silence? But instead, I just looked at him, calm, unreadable. He continued, I made mistakes, a lot of them. I hurt you in ways I can't justify. I was scared, confused. No, I said gently. No, you weren't confused. You were selfish. There is a difference. He looked up then, guilt shadowing his face. For the first time, I saw it. Regret. Not the kind that fixes things, but the kind that comes too late to matter. I thought I'd moved on, he said quietly. But every time something good happens, I still think of you. Every time something goes wrong, I still wish you were there. I took a slow breath, my throat tightening. It was cruel, hearing the words I'd begged for months ago, only now, when they no longer meant salvation. You had me, I said softly. You had all of me, and you let it go. He didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes glistening. I know. And that's what I'll regret for the rest of my life. The silence that followed was heavy, not awkward, but sacred. Two people sitting in the ruins of what used to be love, knowing no apology could rebuild it. After a while, he said, "Can we start over?" My heart skipped, not because I wanted to, but because I realized he still had the power to shake me. I looked at him, the man who once broke me, now asking for another chance. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. No, I whispered. Some things aren't meant to start again. They're meant to stay ended. He nodded slowly, his eyes wet. And in that moment, I saw it. The same pain I carried for so long, finally living in him too. I stood up to leave, my voice barely steady. I hope you find peace someday, but it can't be with me. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Because sometimes, strength isn't about holding on to love, it's about walking away, even when it still hurts.
They say closure brings peace, but no one tells you that peace doesn't come right away. It trickles in slowly, like rain through broken glass. When I walked away from him that evening, I told myself it was over. Truly, finally, completely. But my heart, it didn't listen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his words replaying in my mind like echoes I couldn't turn off. I still think of you. I still wish you were there. It was cruel hearing those words now, when the time to mean them had already passed. I turned off my phone, tried to close my eyes, but memories wouldn't let me. The way he looked at me across that cafe table, like he was seeing me for the first time and the last time all at once. The way his voice cracked when he said, "I'm sorry." For a second, I almost believed him again. Almost. It's strange how the heart remembers what the mind has already forgotten. I knew he wasn't mine anymore. I knew loving him again would only hurt me. But emotions don't obey logic. They linger like perfume on old clothes, faint, familiar, and impossible to wash away completely. The next morning, I woke up feeling heavy. Not sad, exactly, just hollow. Like I'd finally buried something I used to live for. And grief isn't just for death. It's also for endings that never got their closure. I went through the motions that day, work, errands, small talk, but everything felt slightly off, like the world was spinning just a little faster than I could keep up with. Every song, every smell, every word found a way to lead back to him. It wasn't fair. How do you move on from someone who still exists in the same world as you, breathing, living, smiling somewhere else? That night, I walked to the park where we used to go. It was quiet,
the kind of quiet that feels alive. The swings creaked softly, the trees whispered in the wind. I sat on our old bench, the one by the fountain, and let the memories flood in. I remembered how he used to trace shapes on my palm when we sat there, how he'd tell me, "One day we'll come here with our kids." That memory hit like a punch. Because dreams, I realized, don't die. They just stayed trapped in the version of life that never happened. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Why did you come back?" Not to him, but to the air, to the emptiness around me. Why now, when I had finally started healing? Why say all the words I once needed only when they no longer mattered? The wind didn't answer. It never does. Days passed, and I didn't hear from him again. Part of me expected that. Part of me was grateful for it. But there was another part, smaller yet louder, that hated the silence all over again. Because heartbreak has a cruel rhythm. It repeats itself until you finally stop dancing to it. I started journaling, writing down everything I couldn't say to him. Every why, every how could you, every I miss you, I was too proud to send. Each page felt like bleeding on paper, painful but necessary. And with every entry, I began to feel lighter. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my window, I realized something I wish I'd known earlier. Closure doesn't come from another person. It comes from finally deciding that your peace matters more than their apology. He'd come back to clear his conscience, but I had to stay gone to protect my heart. That night, I whispered to myself, "You survived the silence, the lies, the leaving. You'll survive this too." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Because maybe healing isn't about forgetting them. Maybe it's about remembering yourself again, the version of you that existed before they made you believe love was supposed to hurt. That night, I closed my diary, looked at the sky, and smiled faintly because even though the stars reminded me of him, they finally belonged to me again.
Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It arrives quietly, in the small moments when your chest doesn't ache as much, when your favorite song doesn't hurt anymore, when you wake up and realize you didn't dream of them last night. The days after that last breakdown were strange, empty, yet strangely peaceful. I had finally stopped expecting his name on my screen, stopped searching faces in crowds that looked like him. It was like my heart had finally accepted what my mind had known for months. He was gone, and I was still here. I started focusing on myself, something I hadn't done in years. I changed my room, painted the walls a new color, threw out the little things that reminded me of him. It was symbolic, maybe even dramatic, but it felt necessary, like cleaning the dust off my soul. Every brushstroke on those walls felt like reclaiming a piece of me that love had taken. My days filled up again. Classes, long walks, quiet evenings with books, and laughter that didn't feel forced anymore. People around me noticed. "You seem happier," they'd say. And for once, I didn't have to fake a smile when I agreed. But healing isn't linear. Some nights, I still found myself thinking about him, wondering if he ever looked back at our memories the way I did, if he ever missed me at 2 a.m., if he ever thought about what we could have been. And maybe he did, but I stopped needing to know, because love had taught me enough. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation, it's acceptance. Then one afternoon, life did what it always does, surprised me. I was sitting at the same cafe, now just a place I went for coffee, not memories. The door opened, and someone new walked in. He wasn't extraordinary, just simple, with kind eyes and a calm presence. He asked if the seat next to mine was taken. I shook my head. He smiled, and for the first time in a long while, My heart didn't tighten. It softened. We talked about books, music, and random things that didn't hurt. It felt normal. And after months of chaos, normal felt like magic. When he laughed, I caught myself smiling, not because I was reminded of anyone else, but because I wanted to. And that's when I realized something. Healing isn't about never feeling pain again. It's about being able to feel joy without guilt. The more I spoke with him, the more I felt like the universe was telling me something. That maybe heartbreak doesn't close doors, it just redirects you toward better ones. That night, when I walked home, I looked up at the sky, the same sky I once cried under, and smiled. It looked different now. Or maybe I did. I still miss the girl I was before love broke her, but I had grown into someone stronger, softer in the right ways, tougher in the necessary ones. And maybe that's what healing truly means. Not forgetting the past, but forgiving yourself for holding onto it for too long. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from the new guy. "Coffee tomorrow?" it said. I didn't hesitate this time. "Sure," I replied. And just like that, I realized life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It moves. It heals. It loves again. That morning, as I walked out into the sunlight, I whispered to myself, maybe this time love won't break me. Maybe this time it'll teach me how to stay whole.
I never believed life gave second chances. But that morning, as I sat across from someone new, I started to wonder if maybe I'd been wrong. His name was Arman. He was simple, thoughtful, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. He didn't try to fill the silence with promises or charm. He just let me be. And somehow that was enough. We met again a few times after that first coffee. At first, I kept my guard up, my heart still bruised from loving someone who didn't know how to stay. But Arman was patient. He never asked about my past, he just noticed the little things. Like how I went quiet when it rained, or how I smiled but never laughed too loudly anymore. He saw the cracks and didn't try to fix them. He just sat beside them quietly. One evening, as we walked by the lake, he said softly, "You seem like someone who's learning to breathe again." I looked at him, surprised. "How did you know?" He smiled. "Because I'm learning too." Something about that moment felt honest, raw even. Two people, both broken in their own ways, walking the same road toward healing. For the first time, I felt peace instead of fear. But peace doesn't last forever, especially when your past still knows your number. It was late that night when my phone buzzed again. The name on the screen made my stomach twist. Him. I stared at the notification for a long time, my heart racing the same way it used to when I still loved him. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to stay strong, to protect everything I'd built. But another part, the one that still remembered the warmth of his voice, whispered, "What if he needs you?" Against my better judgment, I opened the message. "I heard you're seeing someone." Just 7 words, but somehow they carried the same weight as the night he left me. I didn't reply. I locked my phone and tossed it aside, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. How did he know? Why did he care? After all this time, why was he still trying to live in a chapter I'd already closed? Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept thinking about Arman, about how kind he'd been, how patient, and then, uninvited, came thoughts of the man who broke me, the one who suddenly seemed to miss what he once threw away. The next morning, Arman called. "Coffee today?" he asked, cheerful as ever. I hesitated, guilt washing over me for reasons I couldn't explain. "Yeah," I said, finally. "Same time?" When we met,
I tried to act normal, but he noticed right away. "You're quiet," he said gently. "Something wrong?" I shook my head. "No, just tired." But he smiled knowingly. Sometimes tired means thinking too much. And he was right. I was thinking too much. About the past that wouldn't let me go, and the present that was patiently waiting for me to choose it. That night, I deleted the old number. Or at least I tried to delete it. But when my finger hovered over the delete option, I froze. Because part of healing, I realized, isn't deleting the past. It's learning not to answer when it calls. So I didn't delete him. I just left the message unread, a ghost in my inbox, like a reminder that I'd finally learned the difference between letting go and forgetting. That night, I whispered to myself, maybe the past doesn't need closure. Maybe it just needs silence.
Time moved gently after that night. Days didn't feel heavy anymore. I laughed more easily, slept better, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I stopped counting the hours between heartbreak and peace. Arman had a way of making life feel simple again. He didn't demand explanations for my silences or ask about the scars I kept hidden. He just accepted them, like someone who understood that not all broken things need fixing. Some just need patience. We started seeing each other more often, coffee after class, long walks in the park, late-night talks that felt both new and familiar. With every passing day, he made it harder for me to stay guarded. There was something calm about him, a quiet presence that made the world stop spinning for a while. Once, as we sat by the lake, he said softly, "You have a beautiful way of hiding your pain." I looked at him, unsure how to respond. He continued, "You smile like you're fine, but your eyes, they still search for something." I didn't deny it, because he was right. My heart was healing, yes, but it was also still haunted by echoes of a love that had left too many fingerprints behind. Some nights, I caught myself thinking of the past, not out of longing, but habit. It's strange how pain can become familiar, how loneliness can feel like home, even after you've moved out of it. But every time those thoughts came, Arman's kindness pulled me back to the present. He didn't make me forget my past. He just made me realize it didn't define me anymore. Then, one ordinary afternoon, life decided to remind me that peace is never permanent. I was at the bookstore near my college, one of my favorite places. I was browsing through shelves when I heard a voice behind me. "Still reading romance novels?" My heart froze. That voice, calm, teasing, achingly familiar. I turned around, and there he was, him. He looked different, older, maybe sadder, but those eyes, they still carried the same storm that once wrecked me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was like time folded in on itself, dragging me back to the very moment I'd sworn I'd never relive. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said finally. "Neither did I," I replied, my voice steady but my hands trembling behind the book I held. He smiled faintly. "You look good." I wanted to say, "You don't get to say that anymore," but the words stayed locked in my throat. Instead, I just nodded. "Thanks." He glanced down at my bag, where my phone screen lit up with Arman's name. For a split second, I saw it, the flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, jealousy, maybe both. "So it's true, you're seeing someone," he said quietly. I didn't answer right away. Then I met his gaze and said, "Yes, and I'm happy."
The way he looked at me then, it wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. But not the kind I could feel sorry for, because he had no right to that pain anymore. He nodded slowly, forcing a small smile. "I'm glad. You deserve that." His voice was sincere, but his eyes were drowning in everything unspoken. For a moment, we just stood there. Two people who once shared everything, now strangers pretending to be polite. And in that silence, I realized something. I didn't miss him anymore. I missed the person I thought he was. "I should go," I said softly. He stepped aside, his hand brushing mine just barely, a ghost of a touch, too gentle to hold on to. As I walked away, my phone buzzed again. A message from Arman. "Coffee later? I miss you." And for the first time, I smiled without hesitation, because this time, the person who missed me actually meant it. That night, as I looked out my window, I whispered to myself, maybe love does come back, just not in the same face. I thought seeing him again would bring closure. But closure is a strange thing. It doesn't come when you want it to. It comes when your heart is strong enough to stop searching for it. And I wasn't sure mine was there yet. The next few days felt heavier than usual. I smiled when I was supposed to, laughed when Arman made a joke, but something deep inside me had shifted. It wasn't longing, it was confusion, a quiet storm that whispered, "What if you never stopped caring?" Arman noticed before I could hide it. "You're quieter lately," he said one evening as we walked by the lake. I forced a smile, just tired. He didn't buy it. "No, it's something else." Did I do something? I looked at him, this kind, patient man who was slowly teaching me that love didn't have to hurt, and I hated myself for even thinking about the one who broke me. "No, Arman," I said softly. "You didn't do anything. I'm just thinking." He nodded, not pushing further. That was his way, gentle, understanding, never demanding more than I could give. And that made me ache even more. That night, as I was cleaning my room, my phone buzzed again. Him. The name I had promised myself never to open again. "I shouldn't have come to the bookstore, but seeing you, I realized I still care. I never stopped." My heart pounded, not with excitement, but with anger, confusion, and that old ache I thought I'd outgrown. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to throw my phone away, but instead I just stared at the message, frozen between who I was and who I was trying to become. I didn't reply, but I also didn't delete it, because part of me, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be loved by him, wanted to know what he'd say next. The following morning, I met Arman for breakfast. He was talking about his plans, about a new project he was excited for. I tried to listen, I really did, but my mind kept drifting back to that message sitting unanswered in my phone. "Are you okay?" he asked suddenly. I blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, sorry, I zoned out." He smiled faintly, but his eyes looked worried. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said gently. "Just don't shut me out completely." His words hit harder than I expected, because that's exactly what I was doing, shutting him out, not because I didn't care, but because I was scared. Scared that the ghosts of my past would ruin something good before it even began. Later that night, I sat on my bed, staring at both their names on my phone. One new, one old. Arman's messages were kind, full of warmth and sincerity. His, the one who broke me, were heavy, filled with apologies that came too late. Two men, two versions of love. One teaching me peace, the other reminding me of pain. And yet both lived inside me somehow, one in my present, one in my memory. I hated that I couldn't erase the second. That part of me still wanted to understand why. Around midnight, another message came. Can we talk? One last time. My chest tightened. The same words that had once broken me now begged for attention again. I stared at them until the letters blurred through my tears. This time, I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something. Some stories don't need endings. They just need to stop being rewritten. I put my phone down, took a deep breath, and whispered, I forgive you, but that doesn't mean I want you back. That night, I finally chose silence, because sometimes love isn't about choosing who to hold onto. It's about choosing yourself instead.
The days after that last message were quiet. Too quiet. Sometimes silence feels like peace. Other times it's just the space where guilt hides. I went about my routine, work, walks, coffee with Arman, but a small corner of my mind still echoed with the words I never answered. Can we talk? One last time. I told myself I was stronger now, that I owed nothing to the past. And yet, the thought lingered. What would I say if we did talk? Would I be calm? Angry? Would I crumble the way I once did? These questions followed me like shadows, faint but impossible to ignore. Arman noticed. He always did. You've been somewhere else lately, he said one evening as we sat in the park. I forced a smile. Just tired, long week. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. Okay, just remember, I'm here if you need to talk. It was such a simple thing to say, but it stayed with me the whole night. Because that's what healthy love feels like. Gentle, not demanding, patient enough to wait until you're ready. But I wasn't ready. Not to talk, not to explain, not to admit that part of me was still haunted. I wanted to believe that ignoring my feelings would make them disappear. But grief doesn't vanish when you look away. It just waits. I started dreaming again. Not the kind you chase, but the kind that wakes you with the lump in your throat. In every dream, it was him. Sometimes he apologized, sometimes he just stared, silent, as I tried to walk away. Every morning, I woke up feeling like I'd relived a memory I never wanted back. One afternoon, Arman took me to a little art gallery. He said he wanted me to see something. Inside, the walls were covered in photographs, moments frozen in time. Smiles, sunsets, strangers holding hands. He pointed to one picture of a cracked glass window catching sunlight and said, "See that? Even broken things reflect light." I don't know why, but that moment made me tear up. Maybe because it felt like he wasn't just talking about the glass. Maybe because it reminded me that I'd been reflecting too, carrying light even through the cracks someone else left. That night, as I lay in bed, I picked up my phone again. His message was still there, unopened, unread, unanswered. I hovered over it for a long moment, my thumb shaking slightly. Then, instead of replying, I archived the conversation. Not deleted, not blocked, just tucked away. A quiet acknowledgement that I was done letting old ghosts decide when I sleep or smile. The next morning, I told Arman, I think I'm learning how to let go properly this time. He smiled, that slow, honest kind of smile that makes your chest warm. I'm proud of you, he said. It's not easy. And it wasn't. But for the first time, I wasn't pretending to be fine. I was fine. Not perfect, not healed, just alive. That evening, as we walked home in silence, I realized something. Peace doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "You've done enough. You can rest now." Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a slow unfolding, like dawn creeping in after the longest night. I used to think forgiveness was about the other person, saying, "It's okay," when it wasn't, pretending the hurt no longer mattered. But now, I understand it's something different. It's looking in the mirror and telling yourself you did the best you could with what you knew. It had been weeks since that last message, the one I never answered. He hadn't reached out again. And surprisingly, I didn't check to see if he would. The silence, which once felt like punishment, now felt like peace. My life began to find rhythm again. Mornings with sunlight spilling through the window, the smell of coffee, and the quiet sound of pages turning. Little routines that didn't revolve around anyone but me. It was strange at first, learning how to exist without depending on another heartbeat to remind me I was alive. But every day, it felt a little easier. Arman became a constant, not a savior, but a companion. He didn't rush me, didn't try to fill the spaces my past had emptied. He just stood beside them, reminding me that love can be gentle too. One afternoon, as we sat at our usual spot by the lake, he said, "You don't talk about him anymore." I looked at the water, rippling under the breeze. "Because I don't need to," I said quietly. He nodded. "That's good." And it was. Because healing doesn't always mean forgetting the story. Sometimes it just means you can tell it without breaking apart. That night, as I sat by my window, I went through an old box of memories I had promised myself I'd never open again. Letters, photos, small tokens from a different life. I looked at each piece, one by one. Not with tears, but with understanding. Each item held a story, a version of me that had loved, trusted, and hoped, even when it hurt. I realized something then. I wasn't weak for staying too long. I was human. And humans hold on, not because they're foolish, but because they believe love deserves a chance. I took the letters and walked outside. The night air was cool, the moon soft above me. I didn't burn them dramatically like in movies. I just folded them back neatly, placed them under the old tree in my yard, and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me everything you couldn't give me." The wind picked up, scattering a few of the pages across the grass. And as I watched them drift away, I felt something inside me loosen, like a knot that had been waiting years to untie itself. When I went back inside, I felt light. Not because I'd erased the past, but because I had finally stopped fighting it. Pain had shaped me, yes, but it no longer defined me. The next morning, Arman called, his voice warm and steady. "What are you doing today?" "I'm breathing," I said with a small laugh. He chuckled softly. "Good. Keep doing that." And that was it. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just two people learning how to live honestly. And for the first time, that was enough. That night, as I closed my eyes, I whispered to myself, "I forgive him. I forgive myself, and that's how I'll finally begin again."
There's a softness to peace that people don't talk about enough. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or grand moments. It seeps in quietly, through small, ordinary days that don't hurt anymore. That's how my life started to feel lately. Simple, balanced, unhurried. Like I was finally breathing air that belonged only to me. Arman was part of that calm, but not the reason for it. He became the space where I could simply exist without fear. He never asked me to forget my past or pretend it didn't happen. Instead, he made it feel like something that shaped me, not something that ruined me. Some mornings we'd meet for coffee before work. He'd listen to me talk about my dreams, my ideas, the things that made me feel alive again. And he never once tried to interrupt or fix anything. He'd just smile and say, "I like how your voice changes when you talk about things you love." I didn't realize how much I'd missed being seen like that. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I was becoming. The world started looking beautiful again. Colors felt brighter, music sounded fuller, and silence, the same silence that once suffocated me, now felt like peace. One evening, as we sat near the old lake under a pink sky, Arman asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought for a moment. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But if they had, I might never have met you." He smiled softly. "Then maybe it all happened exactly how it was supposed to." I looked at him, his calm eyes reflecting the fading light, and for the first time, I didn't feel the ache of what could have been. I felt grateful for what was. But healing is a process, not a destination. There were still moments when old memories surfaced, a scent, a song, a passing thought, and I'd feel a quiet sting. But now it didn't break me. It just reminded me how far I'd come. I started writing again, something I'd stopped doing when everything fell apart. Stories about people finding themselves after loss, about love that healed instead of hurt. Arman read one of my drafts and said, "You write like someone who's lived every word." "I have," I replied softly. We spent more time together, not in big moments, but in small ones that made life gentle. Cooking dinner, walking in the rain, sitting in comfortable silence while the world rushed past us. He never promised forever, and I didn't ask him to. We'd both learned that love doesn't need forever to be real. It just needs honesty while it lasts. One night, as we watched the city lights from the rooftop, Arman said, "You know, you've changed." "How?" I asked. "You used to look back when you talked about love. Now, you look forward." That line stayed with me, because he was right. I'd spent so long replaying the past that I forgot love could still be something to look forward to. That night, before sleeping, I caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled. It wasn't a forced smile. It was soft, real, peaceful. The kind of smile that only comes when you finally forgive the world for not being perfect. That night, I whispered to the quiet, "Maybe love doesn't come to fix us. Maybe it comes when we finally learn how to stand on our own." Peace never lasts without being tested. Maybe that's how the world checks if what you've built is real. For months, everything between us had been easy. Morning messages, shared meals, long evenings that ended in quiet laughter. I had begun to believe that love could be simple again. Then life reminded me that even simple things can tremble. It started with distance, not emotional at first, just time. Arman's new project demanded long hours, late nights, endless travel. We spoke less, met rarely, and even though I understood, a familiar ache crept back in, the old fear of being forgotten. One night, after he canceled our plans for the third time in a week, I sat at the cafe alone, watching the rain trace lines on the window. For a moment, the past whispered again. This is how it begins, the silence, the excuse. Peace never lasts without being tested. Maybe that's how the world checks if what you've built is real. For months, everything between us had been easy. Morning messages, shared meals, long evenings that ended in quiet laughter. I had begun to believe that love could be simple again. Then, life reminded me that even simple things can tremble. It started with distance, not emotional at first, just time. Arman's new project demanded long hours, late nights, endless travel. We spoke less, met rarely, and even though I understood, a familiar ache crept back in. The old fear of being forgotten. One night, after he canceled our plans for the third time in a week, I sat at the cafe alone, watching the rain trace lines on the window. For a moment, the past whispered again. This is how it begins. The silence, the excuses, the slow fading. But this time I refused to listen. I texted him, not to accuse, but to reach. "You sound tired. Eat something before you drive home." He replied a minute later, "I will. I promise. I miss you." Simple. Honest. Enough to quiet the ghosts. Still, I missed him. I missed the way he looked at me like I was an answer, not a question. But love, I was learning, isn't measured by how close two people stand. It's measured by how they hold on when life pulls them apart. A few days later, he surprised me at my door. Hair messy, eyes heavy, holding takeout boxes. "He owed you dinner," he said, smiling. When I opened my mouth to scold him for overworking, he added softly, "Don't. I needed to see you." He looked exhausted, but his presence filled the room with warmth. He ate little, talked less, but when he leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "This is home," I understood what love had become. Not fireworks, but quiet returning. We began to talk about small futures, a trip, a dog, a place closer to the sea. Nothing grand, just gentle plans built from patience. Sometimes, though, I caught myself waiting for the next storm, for the next hurt. Healing teaches caution, but it can also build walls. One evening, I told him, "I'm still learning not to expect pain." He looked at me, serious. "Then I'll wait until you stop expecting it, however long it takes." That was the moment I realized I wasn't waiting for perfect anymore. I was living something real. Still, life had one more test. A call came late one night. My mother was ill. Arman drove me to my hometown without hesitation, staying at the hospital for hours, fetching coffee, making small jokes just to see me smile. When exhaustion finally took over, I fell asleep against his shoulder. And in that half-dream, I felt something I hadn't in years: absolute safety. A week later, as my mother recovered, I walked out into the morning air and whispered, "Thank you," to the universe. Because it had tested me again. And this time, I hadn't broken. I had chosen trust over fear, hope over memory. That night, back in the city, Arman asked, "Do you still think peace is fragile?" I smiled. "No, I think it just needs care." He nodded, squeezing my hand. "Then we'll keep caring." That night, as the city lights blurred beyond the windshield, I realized love hadn't erased my scars. It had simply learned how to hold them gently.
Trust doesn't return overnight. It tiptoes back, one steady heartbeat at a time. For months, I'd lived as if love were something fragile that could vanish if I breathed too deeply. But with Arman, I began to realize love didn't have to feel like walking on glass. It could feel like breathing again. He noticed every small thing: the way I hesitated before answering personal questions, the way I flinched when someone raised their voice, the way I sometimes stared into nothing for too long. He never pressed. He'd just place a cup of tea beside me and say, "Take your time." And that simple kindness was louder than any declaration of love I'd ever heard. We started taking weekend trips, short drives outside the city, windows down, music low, his hand resting lightly on the steering wheel. There was something healing about those drives. No destinations, no expectations, just motion. Sometimes he'd hum along to old songs. Sometimes we drove in silence, and it was enough. One afternoon, as golden light spilled through the trees, he said, "You know what I like about us?" "What?" I asked. "That we don't rush anything. You're teaching me that stillness can be love too." I smiled, looking out the window. Maybe we're both learning. Later that evening, rain began to fall. Soft, rhythmic, familiar. I tensed without meaning to. Rain had always carried ghosts for me. He noticed instantly. He turned down the music, pulled over by a small roadside cafe, and said, "Let's sit for a bit." Inside, we watched the rain blur the glass. He reached across the table, open-handed but patient, waiting. Slowly, I placed my hand in his. No trembling, no fear, just warmth. For the first time in years, I didn't pull away.
"I used to hate the rain," I said quietly. He smiled. "Then let's make you love it again." And in that moment, I believed him. After that night, something shifted. I stopped holding parts of myself hostage. I began to talk, really talk, about the things I'd kept buried, about the mistakes, the heartbreak, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep. And he just listened, never once looking at me with pity, only understanding. One evening, after I finished telling him everything, he said softly, "You're not hard to love. You were just loved the wrong way." Those words landed somewhere deep, where even my scares felt seen. Days turned into weeks, and the world seemed gentler. We cooked together, argued over silly things, shared silence that felt like home. There were no grand promises, no forever speeches, just consistency. And maybe that's what love really is, showing up even when the world feels too heavy to carry. That night, as I fell asleep with his hand wrapped around mine, I realized sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to start over. It's to believe you deserve to. Peace never lasts without being tested. Maybe that's how the world checks if what you've built is real. For months, everything between us had been easy. Morning messages, shared meals, long evenings that ended in quiet laughter. I had begun to believe that love could be simple again. Then life reminded me that even simple things can tremble. It started with distance, not emotional at first, just time. Arman's new project demanded long hours, late nights, endless travel. We spoke less, met rarely, and even though I understood, a familiar ache crept back in, the old fear of being forgotten. One night, after he canceled our plans for the third time in a week, I sat at the cafe alone, watching the rain trace lines on the window. For a moment, the past whispered again. This is how it begins. The silence, the excuses, the slow fading. But this time, I refused to listen. I texted him, not to accuse, but to reach. "You sound tired. Eat something before you drive home." He replied a minute later, "I will, I promise. I miss you." Simple, honest, enough to quiet the ghosts. Still, I missed him. I missed the way he looked at me like I was an answer, not a question. But love, I was learning, isn't measured by how close two people stand. It's measured by how they hold on when life pulls them apart. A few days later, he surprised me at my door, hair messy, eyes heavy, holding takeout boxes. He said, "I owed you dinner," smiling. When I opened my mouth to scold him for overworking, he added softly, "Don't. I needed to see you." He looked exhausted, but his presence filled the room with warmth. He ate little, talked less, but when he leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "This is home," I understood what love had become. Not fireworks, but quiet returning. We began to talk about small futures, a trip, a dog, a place closer to the sea. Nothing grand, just gentle plans built from patience. Sometimes, though, I caught myself waiting for the next storm, for the next hurt. Healing teaches caution, but it can also build walls. One evening I told him, "I'm still learning not to expect pain." He looked at me, serious. "Then I'll wait until you stop expecting it, however long it takes." That was the moment I realized I wasn't waiting for perfect anymore. I was living something real. Still, life had one more test. A call came late one night that my mother was ill. Arman drove me to my hometown without hesitation, staying at the hospital for hours, fetching coffee, making small jokes just to see me smile. When exhaustion finally took over, I fell asleep against his shoulder. And in that half-dream, I felt something I hadn't in years: absolute safety. A week later, as my mother recovered, I walked out into the morning air and whispered, "Thank you," to the universe. Because it had tested me again, and this time I hadn't broken. I had chosen trust over fear, hope over memory. That night, back in the city, Arman asked me, "Do you still think peace is fragile?" I smiled. "No, I think it just needs care." He nodded, squeezing my hand. "Then we'll keep caring." That night, as the city lights blurred beyond the windshield, I realized love hadn't erased my scars. It had simply learned how to hold them gently.
Peace never lasts without being tested. Maybe that's how the world checks if what you've built is real. For months, everything between us had been easy. Morning messages, shared meals, long evenings that ended in quiet laughter. I had begun to believe that love could be simple again. Then life reminded me that even simple things can tremble. It started with distance, not emotional at first, just time. Armand's new project demanded long hours, late nights, endless travel. We spoke less, met rarely, and even though I understood, a familiar ache crept back in, the old fear of being forgotten. One night, after he canceled our plans for the third time in a week, I sat at the cafe alone, watching the rain trace lines on the window. For a moment, the past whispered again. This is how it begins: the silence, the excuse. Peace never lasts without being tested. Maybe that's how the world checks if what you've built is real. For months, everything between us had been easy. Morning messages, shared meals, long evenings that ended in quiet laughter. I had begun to believe that love could be simple again. Then, life reminded me that even simple things can tremble. It started with distance, not emotional at first, just time. Armand's new project demanded long hours, late nights, endless travel. We spoke less, met rarely, and even though I understood, a familiar ache crept back in, the old fear of being forgotten. One night, after he canceled our plans for the third time in a week, I sat at the cafe alone, watching the rain trace lines on the window. For a moment, the past whispered again. This is how it begins: the silence, the excuses, the slow fading. But this time I refused to listen. I texted him, not to accuse, but to reach. "You sound tired. Eat something before you drive home." He replied a minute later, "I will. I promise. I miss you." Simple, honest, enough to quiet the ghosts. Still, I missed him. I missed the way he looked at me like I was an answer, not a question. But love, I was learning, isn't measured by how close two people stand. It's measured by how they hold on when life pulls them apart. A few days later, he surprised me at my door. Hair messy, eyes heavy, holding takeout boxes. "He owed you dinner," he said, smiling. When I opened my mouth to scold him for overworking, he added softly, "Don't. I needed to see you." He looked exhausted, but his presence filled the room with warmth. He ate little, talked less, but when he leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "This is home," I understood what love had become. Not fireworks, but quiet returning. We began to talk about small futures: a trip, a dog, a place closer to the sea. Nothing grand, just gentle plans built from patience. Sometimes, though, I caught myself waiting for the next storm, for the next hurt. Healing teaches caution, but it can also build walls. One evening, I told him,
I'm still learning not to expect pain. He looked at me, serious. Then I'll wait until you stop expecting it, however long it takes. That was the moment I realized I wasn't waiting for perfect anymore. I was living something real. Still, life had one more test. A call came late one night. My mother was ill. Arman drove me to my hometown without hesitation, staying at the hospital for hours, fetching coffee, making small jokes just to see me smile. When exhaustion finally took over, I fell asleep against his shoulder. And in that half dream, I felt something I hadn't in years: absolute safety. A week later, as my mother recovered, I walked out into the morning air and whispered thank you to the universe, because it had tested me again. And this time, I hadn't broken. I had chosen trust over fear, hope over memory. That night, back in the city, Arman asked, "Do you still think peace is fragile?" I smiled. "No, I think it just needs care." He nodded, squeezing my hand. "Then we'll keep caring." That night, as the city lights blurred beyond the windshield, I realized love hadn't erased my scars. It had simply learned how to hold them gently.